I have the honor and privilege of reading a retelling of Scripture this morning. And also, sorry, if we haven't met, my name's Drew. I'm the cool guy here. Listen, I worked hard for my master's degree in coolness, okay? Jeez, so don't laugh. It's serious. It's real. It's a pleasure to be here with you all on this beautiful day. So I'm going to read the Scripture and let it kind of sink in. Let it be a good way to start the day. Moses had made a life for himself in a place called Midian. Years had passed since he had fled there, long enough for the sharp edges of old memories to soften, long enough to learn the rhythms of another land, long enough to marry and raise a family, tend the flocks, settle into the ordinary work of ordinary days. And so one morning, like countless mornings before it, Moses gathered the sheep and led them out into the wilderness. But that day, Moses kept going, past the familiar grazing places and past the usual paths. He went beyond the wilderness into Horeb, the very mountain of God. And there, in the place beyond the places, something caught his eye. A bush burned among the rocks. Its branches shimmered with flame, and the fire curled up through its branches. But the mysterious thing was that the fire consumed nothing. Moses stopped and stared at the mystery. I must turn aside and look at this great sight, he said to himself. Why is the bush not burned up? So he left the path he was on and walked towards the fire. Once he turned aside to see, a voice called to him within the flame, Moses. That's my God voice. Hopefully you're impressed. As the voice spoke, a silence came over the wilderness. Even the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Moses. And Moses answered, Here I am. The voice told him not to come any closer and to remove the sandals from his feet, for the ground he was standing on was holy ground. And the voice spoke. It spoke of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It spoke of his people enslaved and suffering in Egypt, and how their cries had risen from the earth, and how their pain had been felt, and how their oppression had been seen. Then the voice said, I will send you to free them. Moses looked into the flames, and questions came protesting out. Who am I? Who should I say sent me? What if they do not believe me? And the questions rose one after another, as though he could build a wall with them. But the voice remained. The fire remained. The invitation remained. And there, beyond the wilderness, Moses stood barefoot before a burning bush, listening to a voice that knew his name and was calling him toward a future he knew he had to embrace. This is our story. Thanks be to God.
I am Nick. I'm not the cool guy. I don't think you can have Reverend in front of your name and be a cool guy. God be with you. Thanks, Drew. So if that felt a bit different, it's because it's what we call in church world a targum. And a targum is it's essentially a retelling of a well-known story. It was this ancient practice that faith communities all across the world have used for generations to bring new life to old stories. It's to kind of help people, as the late Marcus Borg would say, to help people hear these stories again for the first time. It's kind of recognizing that after a while of hearing these stories again and again and again, They become so familiar, you stop actually hearing what they have to offer. And targums are meant to kind of reimagine, reinvent, play with it a little bit, to draw you into what these stories actually have to say to us today. And there's a lot baked into this story. This is like a super rich, vibrant, beautiful story. There's all kinds of places we could go. But today, we're going to go two places. We're going to have two thoughts that we can have about this story, two bits of wisdom that can pull us into life as it's meant to be. We have one thought on where we really find God, and then we have another thought on how we as human beings, as spiritual people, are really meant to think about things like calling and purpose. Are you with me? Sound good? You'll come with me? Great, because that's where we're going. So let's do this. Let's start with the first thing, and let's jump into a line in this story that I don't think I've really paid attention to before. It's in most of the translations, so it's been right in front of my face, but I've never really stopped long enough to see what it's trying to do. And you can see that line right at the very beginning where Moses is out tending the flocks of his father-in-law in a place called Midian, and he goes beyond the wilderness. He goes beyond the wilderness. And to really see what's going on in that line, we actually need to know a bit about Moses and why the guy is in a place called Midian, which is in the middle of nowhere, and why he is tending his father-in-law's sheep. Which, to be clear, is not a place anybody wants to be. We've all seen those movies or stories where, like, the father-in-law gives the son-in-law, like, a job. Like, it's not an honorable thing. It means you're a failure. It means someone who is looking after you that should not be looking after you. In the story that Moses would want to tell about himself, he should not be in Midian looking after his father-in-law's sheep. Because why is he there? Let's back up a little bit. Why is he in a place called Midian? If you know his story, and if Disney has taught us anything, we know that his life fell apart, right? We know that he grew up as a prince in Egypt. He was in the Pharaoh's household. He was in the center of all the action. He had all the power and authority and access and influence and status and wealth. He had it all. And then one day he's out for a walk, and he sees an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew person, which is one of Moses' people. And something in Moses snaps. Something in him moves where he feels compelled to intervene, and he ends up killing the Egyptian. And he knows that was a really bad move because you don't protect an enslaved person. You don't stand up for the small guy. And so Moses knows he's overstepped. He knows that the empire's now going to hunt him down and probably kill him too. He knows he's about to lose everything, and so he takes off. And he runs and runs and runs and runs and runs until he lands in a place called Midian, which literally means strife. So he lands in strife. He lands in discord. He lands in consternation, which really shapes how we see the rest of the story. Because here's Moses, not where he wants to be, not where he's supposed to be. He's looking after his father's sheep, and that's exactly what he's feeling, strife. He's walking out in the fields with all the shame and the failure and the regrets. He's carrying all the what-if questions that he's got. And he walks, and he walks, and he walks, and we're told he walks beyond the wilderness. And we need to pull over here because whenever we hear the word wilderness in Scripture, it's not just talking about wilderness. It's never just about rocks and sand and bad cell phone service. It's always about spirituality. It's rarely about geography. It's not just talking about a place out there. It's talking about a place in here. This is what we're talking about when we talk about wilderness. We're talking about that place we go, that thing that happens within us when everything falls apart. It's what we call those times when our understanding of the universe, when our navigation of it all doesn't work anymore. It's what happens when certainty disappears, when we're feeling overwhelmed and lost in things like grief and anger and frustration and chaos and shame, regret and disappointment. It's what we call the places that you can't think your way out of. That's wilderness. That's what we're talking about. This place in our life that no longer feels settled and grounded and coherent and under control. Do you know those places? Yeah, been to those places? Yeah, if you're a human, you all have. You all know the wilderness. And while it's going to be unique to every single one of us, the feeling, the upset, the consternation of it all, the strife of it all, that's going to be all the same. And because we've all experienced it, we also all know what we feel when we land there. We're like, get me out of here, right? Everything within us says, nope, because we don't want wilderness. We don't want the feeling of being lost and upset and upheaval. We want certainty. We want control. We want clarity. We want familiarity. We want out of the wilderness, not into the wilderness. And we do everything we possibly can to get out. And yet, here's this story. Here is this story that's meant to be our story. Here is this story meant to teach us about how to be human and alive in the world. And we get this guy named Moses, who is feeling it all, who knows exactly what you've also felt. And he's not escaping the wilderness. He's not trying to get out of it. He's not running away from it. He's actually moving into it. And so much so, we're told he goes beyond the wilderness. Not to the other side, but further in, as in deeper into it, as in the wilderness of the wilderness. That's where he goes. And it's there, beyond the wilderness, in the deepest and darkest place, in the thick of his pain and suffering, in the basement of basements of basements of his life. What happens? It's there that we're told he finds God. It's there he encounters the very source of life and ground of being. It's there he encounters God. And if this story has anything that we need to hear, I think it's this. It's this really radical idea that says we don't find God by escaping the wilderness. We find God by entering into it. It's this idea that says the holiest of places in our lives are the ones that we're probably working the hardest to avoid. It's this idea that says God is not waiting for us on the other side of our pain, but God is waiting for us in our pain. And I know that's probably not what you came here to hear today. That's not a nice little Hallmark card that you get in the mail. But I also know you know that it's true. I know that we've all experienced this to be true. I know for me, the more I go into my grief, the more I go into my wounds, into my fear and shame, the more I go into the things I'd rather just not touch, the more I go into the questions I'd rather not answer, the more I go into what Carl Jung called the cave, the more I go into that, the more I end up being in the deeper and more fuller and more robust and rich presence of God. I know that to be true. Anyone else know that to be true? Yeah, this is one of those paradoxes of life that we have to embrace, that we have to sit in. And this is the wisdom we get in our tradition of what we do with our pain. We enter into it. You gotta go in. You have to go in. And not because pain is good and not because suffering is somehow sacred, but we go in because there's something about sitting in our wilderness. There's something about going beyond the edges of what we know and are comfortable with. There's something about that that disarms us. There's something about that that puts things down, that allows us not only to encounter God, but in and through that find the healing and wisdom and peace that we're actually looking for. And what the story reminds us of is that the places we think that will undo us are actually the places that we'll actually find life in. Those are the places that we have to go. Which gives us some questions that we have to ask. And you can take these home for later. But this story asks us some really important questions like, what are you avoiding? And right away, the thing comes into your head. What hard conversation are you avoiding? What would it mean for you to go beyond your wilderness? What do you need to enter into? What courage do you need to muster in order to go into the place you're avoiding to find the God that is waiting for you there? Yeah, so put those questions on your back burner, because those questions take us to the other part of the story, which takes us to our second point, and we get to talk about the burning bush. And again, all kinds of places we could go with this. This is just like fascinating. But let's go here. And so Moses, he sees the burning bush. He feels wonder and awe. He gets curious. He moves towards it. He takes off his shoes because he's on holy ground. And he has this life-changing conversation with God. And this conversation really matters. We really need to stop and look at this, because God does something weird here. And whenever God does something weird, we got to stop and look at it, because this is always where the storytellers are trying to draw our attention. Because God does not talk to Moses about all his feelings and about his past and what brought him there. It does not come up. What brought Moses into the wilderness in the first place is not what God talks to Moses about. And that matters because the first thing that God says to Moses in the wilderness is about suffering. The thing that God talks to Moses about is suffering. God talks about how she's heard the cries of Moses' people, how she felt their pain, and how she's seen the misery they are experiencing in the hands of empire. And just note how beautiful that is. That what we get here is a God of empathy, that we get a God of compassion. But it also shows us that we have a God who is first and foremost concerned with justice. And I think we need to hear that too, because how often, especially in our prayers and the songs that we sing, how often do we make God out to be only concerned about ourselves, our wants, our desires, and our own needs? How often we think and come before God is that first thing on our mind? And it's not a bad thing. It's not to say that God is not concerned with those things. It's not to say those things don't matter. But it is to zoom us out a little bit and help us see that we have a God who does not simply comfort the afflicted, but wants to confront the things that are afflicting them. That's what God is about. Name the things that are unjust, evil, and sinful, and wanting to tear them down and build something better up. And so, having named all this suffering, God turns to Moses and says, I'm sending you. Go in there and free my people. And now usually when a minister writes this sermon, it ends up being a sermon about Moses' purpose, his calling, and it's really just about something that happened instead of about something that happens. It's really just a plot point to get from here to here, and that takes us to the Exodus, which takes us to the prophets, which takes us to the New Testament, which takes us to Jesus. And it's just one point in a bigger story. And sure, that's true. We can read it that way. But I also think we can go a little bit deeper. We can trust that these stories are our stories. And I think this has something to say about how we in here understand things like calling and purpose. And just think about those things for a second, because I want to guess that those are big deals to you. Right? It's a big deal to have a calling, to have a purpose. Those matter to us as humans, right? Yeah, of course they do. We all want that. We want to have a deeper purpose. We want to feel like the universe has a special role for you, that we're made for this one particular thing. And when we find that thing, then we will be fulfilled. Then we can find life as it's meant to be. Then we'll be whole. Then life will be full of joy. And I believe that's true. I think a sense of purpose and calling is one of the most important things that we can have in our lives. But this is where our tradition would pipe up and say, yeah, but, when it comes to our calling and our purpose, when it comes to that thing that we are searching for, here's the thing you need to know. Here's a special thing we bring to this conversation about calling and purpose. It's never going to be about you. It's always going to be about others. Your calling and your purpose will never be for the sake of yourself. It will always be for the sake of others. It will always be for others because our primary calling in life, our primary purpose, the thing that we'll really find life in, is never going to be self-fulfillment. It's always going to be liberation. It will always be in doing something that moves people from captivity to freedom. That is where we find our lives, in that movement. This is what one of my favorite writers, Fred Buechner, is getting at when he says, our calling is always found where the world's great sadness and your great gladness meet. Your calling will always be found in the place where the world's great sadness and your great gladness meet. That's your purpose. That's your calling. It is always going to be in the repair and restoration of the universe. That is where we come most alive. That's where our purpose is found. And however that looks, however that gets expressed, whatever your joy is, the fundamental purpose of it, the thing that needs to be added into it, is to move people from captivity to freedom, from fear to wholeness, shame to dignity, exclusion to embrace, from systems that crush people to systems that nourish people. That's the work. That will be the heart of it. And again, it can look any kind of way you want. The form will always be different, but the heartbeat will always be the same. Whether it is through healing or teaching or art or dance or building stuff or coaching or therapy, whatever it is, however it looks, or simply just by being kind, you need to bake into that liberation, helping people escape the things that keep them small and suffocated and worthless and become things that are big and beautiful and worthy. That's the work. And if you do that, if you help people become more whole and more alive and more safe and more dignified, then you will have found your purpose. If you resist what dehumanizes, if you push back against shame, if you loosen the grip of fear, if you create more room for people to breathe, then you have found your calling. Because that's what it means to be human, is to join God in this work of repairing and restoring the universe and making the world one where everybody has enough and everyone has a place. And I have to think that's good news. Because how many of us in here have spent so much time and so much effort searching for that one thing that will be our joy? That one thing that we're made to do. And the beauty of this wisdom is it's actually not that complicated. All you have to go and do is be someone who is loving, be someone who is kind, be someone who liberates, who sees suffering, who hears cries, and move towards it and do what you can to bring healing, life, light, and love. That's it. It really is that simple. You can be at the grocery store and do this. You can be a mailman and do this. You can be a teacher and do this. You can do this anywhere. As Andrea said, it's just how you do it. That's what matters. purpose is less about what and more about how. That's the beauty of our tradition. It all comes down to how. And so again, some questions for you. What's your purpose? How can you be an agent of life and healing and liberation in the world? How can you take what you're already doing and shift it so you can find your God-given purpose of liberation? So you can contribute to the healing of everyone and everything. That's what it's all about. That's where you find your life. And I guarantee you, the moment you start doing that, the more alive you will become. Because that's what you're made to do. So this time is going to be for you. You can sing along. You can go light some candles in the back. You can sit and pray. You can just zone out and let all of this go to work. But if you leave with anything, leave with this. You are made to heal. You are made to liberate. You are made to repair and restore. And even the smallest little things, they count. And you are made to go into the wilderness. As scary as it's going to be, you are made to go there because that's where everything is waiting for you to find. So may you have courage. May you live boldly. And to that we all say, Amen.